Hi everyone. So today we're going to talk about CodeIgniter URLs, URL helper. Okay, so the URL helper file contains functions that assist in working with URLs. Where we can use these URL helpers? We can use URL helpers for anchor links with pop-up window, images source, CSS hypertext reference, JavaScript source, and also for redirection. So what are the two things that we should do before using the URL helpers? First, of course, we need to load the helper, maybe by manual loading or through auto loading. Then the second thing that we should do is to set up the base URL. Okay? Okay, so let's start with the manual loading. URL helper is loaded using the following code. This load helper, then URL. So having this code, usually nilalagay natin to sa mga controller method, o di kaya sa constructor method ng isang controller, or pwede naman sa mga model. Okay? So this is how we do it. We just append it like that. This load helper, then yung URL. Okay? So if that's the case na ma-load na yung that particular URL, then we can already utilize yung mga functions available on that particular helper. Okay, guys? Okay, so auto-loading resources. CodeIgniter comes with an auto-load features that permits libraries, helpers, and models to be initialized automatically every time the system runs. The following items can be loaded automatically. First is classes found in the libraries directory. Then we have helper files found in the helpers directory. Then we have the custom config files found in the config directory. Then language files found in the system language directory. Then the models found in the models folder or directory. Okay? To autoload resources, open the application, config, autoload the PHP file, and add the item you want to be loaded to the autoload array. You'll find instruction in that file corresponding to each type of item. Note, do not include the file extension .php when adding items to the autoload array. Okay, so let's go to our project and go to application folder, config folder, then look for the autoload.php file. Then once you're already in here, hanapin lang natin itong autoload array with having an index of helper. Then yung gagawin lang natin is to add an item to this particular array. So yung ilalagay natin is yung URL. So once we do that, every time the system runs, then the helper will be loaded. Then if that's the case, then available na yung mga functions na pwede nating magamit on that particular helper. Okay? Okay, the next thing na gagawin natin is to set up the base URL. To set up the base URL, open the application, config, then go to the config.php file, and assign the base URL of your project to config base URL variable. You'll find instruction in that file corresponding to each type of item. Okay? So, balik tayo sa ating code. Look for the application folder, config, then the config.php file. Okay, and hanapin natin itong config array na mayroong index na base URL. Then, ilalagay lang natin dito yung base URL natin. So basically, ito yung base URL natin, localhost slash, then yung project name, which is yung my first CI project. Okay? So, paano ba natin hahanapin? Ano pa ba yung ibang means para mahanap natin yung base URL natin? So, punta lang tayo sa browser and type natin yung homepage ng project natin. So, basically, it will be localhost slash my first CI project. And yung gagawin mo lang is to copy that URL and i-paste mo dito. Then, that will be your base URL. Okay, guys? So that's how we set up the base URL. Okay, so since we're already done setting up those requirements, auto-loading our resources for the URL helper, and then setting up the base URL, now let's talk about the functions in URL helper. So let's start with the site URL function. Then we also have the base URL function, anchor function, anchor pop-up function, and redirect function. So I just choose some of the functions available in the URL helpers, which is the common function that we can use for our project. Okay. So let's start with the site URL function. This function returns the site URL as specified in your config file. The index.php file or whatever you have set as your site index page in your config file will be added to the URL, and also the URI segment you pass to the function, plus the URL suffix as set in your config file. You are encouraged to use this function anytime you need to generate a local URL so that your pages become more portable in the event your URL changes. Segments can optionally pass to the function as a string or an array. Okay? So ito yung syntax natin. Site underscore URL, then the first parameter will be a URI string, then the second parameter will be a protocol, whether it is a HTTP or HTTPS. Then basically the return value will be the full site URL, and the return type is string. Okay, so having this example, we try to call the function site URL and pass the URI string here. So the possible output will be something like this. https://localhost/myfirstCI project, in which this is the base URL. Then appended the index.php, and this is the URI part that we indicated in this part. Okay? So if you intend to remove this one, which is soon, that's the thing that we're going to do naman, but we're going to discuss this on the separate video on removing this one. Kasi if you're going to access this particular page without having the index.php file, then hindi nyo ma-view or ma-access yung page. Parang yung lalabas lang noon is something object not found. Okay, at the moment, yun mangyayari. But if you already manipulated the htaccess of that one, then remove na natin to, but still we can able to access the page that we need to access. Okay, guys? So that's the generated result once we use the site URL. Okay, so ito naman yung example using an array as a segments. So the output will be the same nung kanina. Yung pinagkaiba lang is how we pass a URI segments. Okay? Okay, now let's try to implement yung site URL in our code. So ito yung code, yung blog view natin before. So let's try to implement some code dito. So I created an anchor tag or anchor link and use the site URL in the part of the href. Okay? In which usually dito naman natin nilalagay yung mga URL Now, once we click on that link, it will redirect to another page. So, since the site URL generate a full URL, then ito yung gagamitin natin dito. Ano ba yung advantage nito basically? Since it provide a site URL, and once magkaroon ng changes pagdating ng araw, sabihin natin, pinalitan natin yung domain name natin or yung folder name natin. Tapos, sabihin natin hindi pa tayo gumagamit ng ganitong function. What will happen if there are already 3 links? Yung gagawin natin is we're going to update the 3 links to have the consistent URL of the domain side or the folder name. Okay? So what if there are more than 3? Sabihin natin 10 or more than 10. Sabihin natin 50. So parang mahirap na kung ganun yung gagawin natin. But if we're going to utilize yung site URL, there's only one place that we're going to update. It is only on the part of base URL. Okay? In which we indicate the homepage natin, yung kaninang ginawa natin. Okay? So that's the good thing. That's why it is totally encouraged for us to utilize the site URL. Okay? Okay, ngayon naman, let's try to talk about the base URL. This function will return the site base URL as specified in your config file. This function returns the same thing as site URL but without the index page or suffix or URL suffix being appended. Okay. Also, like site URL, you can simply supply segments as a string or an array. So ito yung syntax niya, base underscore URL, then first parameter will be the URL string, second parameter will be the protocol, HTTP or HTTPS. Then it will return the base URL. And the return type will be a string. Okay? Okay, for example, if we try to call the function without having any kind of URI string specified, then the output will be something like this. Okay, so this is the URL that we specified in our config file. Okay. Now, we can also specify or supply a URI segments. Then the output will be something like this. As you will notice, guys, it did not append any kind of yung index.php file dito. Hindi siya nag-append comparing to the site URL. Okay? So that's one of the difference nila. Okay, now let's try to implement the code, the function in our code. Okay, so in our project, I also created a directory called assets, and meron din ako mga subdirectory of CSS, images, and JS, and also their corresponding files like the style.css, fix.png, and the animation.js. So, yung ginawa ko dito, I tried to use the base URL to source reference those files. Okay? So, mas ginagamit ko guys yung base URL if I want to source reference. Like for the CSS link, a CSS file. Like ganito, link href, then assets /css/css files, which is located here. Then, for the image naman, base URL asset /images/fix.png. Then, for the JavaScript file, base URL the function, then asset/js/animation.js. Okay, so mas ginagamit ko siya guys in the part of source referencing talaga. Bakit kamo? Comparing kasi sa site URL, yung site URL, yung point niya, naka-point na siya dito. Once mag-create siya ng URL, it automatically point dito sa index.php file. So after that, yung sunod na, the URI next to that particular URI will be the class/function/id. Kasi nandito na siya sa index. Dito. But if we're going to utilize yung base URL, since it is not appending the index.php file, then yung mangyayari, it will point to the root directory. That is why we can able to access the assets directory and specify yung mga resources natin, especially in the part of CSS, images, and also JavaScript files. Okay? So take note lang guys. Okay? So we utilize site URL for anchor tags, mga anchor links, mga ganon. But we utilize base URL para sa mga source referencing na process. Okay? So, para hindi kayo malito. Okay guys? I hope it is clear regarding the difference ng site at saka ng base URL. Okay? Okay, next tayo. So let's talk about the anchor function. This function creates a standard HTML anchor link based on your site URL. So ito yung syntax natin. First, the URI. Of course, the URI string. Then title, yung makikita ng user. Okay, then the HTML attributes in a form of, you can state a string or an array. Okay, then the return HTML hyperlinks or anchor tag. Then the return type will be a string. Okay, so the parameter, okay, the first parameter can contains any segments you wish to be appended to the URL. The second parameter is the text you would like the link to say. If you leave it blank, the URL will be used. Then the third parameter can contain a list of attribute you would like added to the link. The attribute can be simply string or an associative array. Okay. Okay, so let's have an example here. We're going to update this code, and provide this one. So we didn't have the anchor tag here being appended. Instead, we just use yung anchor function. So the first parameter basically URI. Then the second will be the label or the title na makikita ng user. Then we have the attribute here of title that will serve as a tooltip for the link. Dito naman, I utilize yung array, while dito, hindi ako gumamit ng attribute. Okay? So let's try to check this out on our browser. So ito na yung output. If we're going to check out the code, yung makikita natin is ganito. As you can notice, nag-generate siya ng URL. Okay? I mean anchor tag. Then it also generated the full URL. Okay? Then we also have the attribute for this particular link. Same thing dito. It also generated an anchor tag, then the URL, and also the attribute. And same thing dito. Okay? Okay, now let's try to talk about the anchor pop-up function. Nearly identical to the anchor function, except that it opens the URL in a new window. You can specify JavaScript window attributes in the third parameter to control how the window is opened. If the third parameter is not set, it will simply open a window with your own browser settings. So ito yung syntax niya, anchor underscore pop-up, then the URI string, the title, then the attributes. Okay? Then the return, basically a pop-up hyperlink, and the type is string. Okay, ito yung sample ng attributes natin. We have the width, the height, the scroll bars, status, resizable, screen X, screen Y, and Windows name. Then ito lang gagawin natin. Okay? Okay, note lang. The sample attribute are the function default, so you can only need to set the ones that you are different from what you need. If you want the function to use all of its defaults, simply pass an empty array in the third parameter. Okay, something like this. Then the window name is not really an attribute, but an argument to the JavaScript window.open method, which accepts either a window name or a window target. Okay, so any other attribute that than the listed in the sample attribute will be parsed as an HTML attribute to the anchor tag. Okay? Okay, so ito yung code natin before. Let's try to update this code into something like this. So, having the attribute, anchor pop-up, the URI, the title, and the attributes. So, let's try to check the browser. This is the sample output that we have. And if we try to click on this particular link, which is click me, then this will display. Okay? The new window with having this URL based to the specified URI on the function, and of course it display the content of that particular page. Okay, so that's how we manage yung anchor pop-up. Okay, so redirect function. This function does a header redirect to the URI specified. So ito yung syntax natin. Redirect, then the first parameter will be the URI string, then the second parameter will be the method for auto, location, refresh. Then the code will be the HTTP response code, which is usually the 301 and the 302 redirect. Then the return type will be void. Okay, so we have here explanation for the parameters. So the first parameter, you can specify a full site URL or a URI segments. So the optional second parameter allows you to force particular redirection method. The available methods are auto, location, and refresh, with location being faster but less reliable on IIS servers. The default is auto, which will attempt to intelligently choose the method based on the server environment. Okay? So the optional third parameter allows you to send a specific HTTP response code. This could be used, for example, to create a 301 redirects for search engine purposes. The default response code is 302. The third parameter is only available with location redirects, not refresh. Okay? Okay, so we usually use redirect function after a specific process, like first, a successful process of signing up or logging in an account, then you want to redirect it to its account dashboard. So ito yung sample code natin. Okay? Then, let's say unsuccessful process of logging in, then you want to redirect it back to the login page. So you can also use that. Then the third is, if the account session was already expired, then you want it to be redirected back to the home page or login page. Home page, ganito lang. Then for the login page, kung ano yung nilagay mong URI. Okay? Based sa pagkakagawa mo ng project mo. Okay guys? So basically those are the things na pwede nating paggamitan ng function na to, which is the redirect function. Okay? Note lang. In order for this function to work, it must be used before anything is outputted to the browser, since it utilizes server headers. So basically, we place this function within our controller method and before the view loading method. Okay? Yeah. Okay, so I think that's it guys. So I hope you learned something new today regarding our topic, which is about the CodeIgniter URLs, URL helper. So basically, there are a lot of things that we have learned in this part: the site URL, the base URL, the anchor function, the anchor pop-up function, and also the redirect function. So you can utilize them in creating your project, especially creating links, source referencing, and some redirection. Okay, guys? So if you did learn today regarding our topic, please click thumbs up and please don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you will not miss our upcoming videos. Okay? So just like I always say, just keep practicing and never stop learning. Thank you for watching, guys, and goodbye for now.